William Thompson sat in the corner of his favorite coffee shop, watching people walk by through the large window. At 62 years old, he had always been the kind of man who could talk to anyone about anything. His friends often joked that he could sell ice to someone living in Alaska. But today was different. Today, William struggled to order his usual black coffee. The young barista behind the counter waited patiently as William pointed to the menu board, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No words came out. He felt embarrassed and confused. This had been happening more often over the past few weeks, but he kept telling himself it was just stress from his recent retirement. William had worked as a high school English teacher for 35 years. He loved literature, poetry, and most of all, he loved helping his students find their voices through writing. His classroom was always filled with lively discussions about books, life, and dreams. Students would often return years later to thank him for believing in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. His wife, Martha, had noticed the changes first. During dinner conversations, William would stop mid-sentence, looking frustrated and lost. She would gently encourage him to continue, but he would just shake his head and change the subject. Martha worried, but William brushed off her concerns, saying he was just tired from all the years of teaching. The first real warning sign came during his retirement party at the school. William had prepared a speech to thank his colleagues and share memories from his teaching career. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of teachers who had become like family, his mind went blank. Not the kind of blank that comes from nervousness, but something deeper and more frightening. He opened his mouth to speak and nothing happened. The words he had practiced for weeks simply wouldn't come. His principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, quickly stepped in and suggested they skip the speech portion of the evening. William nodded gratefully, but inside he felt a growing sense of panic. That night, Martha found him sitting on their back porch, staring at the stars. She sat down beside him and took his hand. After 38 years of marriage, she knew when something was seriously wrong. William tried to explain what had happened, but even in the quiet of their own home, the words came slowly and with great effort. The next morning, Martha called their family doctor, Dr. Peterson, and scheduled an appointment. William protested, insisting he was fine, but Martha had made up her mind. She had lost her father to a stroke 5 years earlier, and she recognized some of the same signs. Dr. Peterson had been their family physician for over 20 years. He was a kind man with gentle hands and a way of making his patients feel comfortable. During the appointment, he asked William to perform simple tasks: count to 10, recite the alphabet, tell him about his day. What should have been easy became increasingly difficult. William could think the words clearly in his mind, but getting them from his brain to his mouth felt like trying to push water uphill. Dr. Peterson's expression grew more serious as the examination continued. He tested William's reflexes, checked his blood pressure, and asked detailed questions about when the symptoms first appeared. After the examination, Dr. Peterson sat down across from William and Martha. His usual warm smile was replaced by a look of professional concern. He explained that William's symptoms could indicate several different conditions, but they needed to run more tests to be certain. He scheduled appointments for blood work, an MRI scan, and a consultation with a neurologist. The waiting period between the appointment and the test results felt like the longest 2 weeks of William's life. He tried to continue his normal routine of reading the morning newspaper and tending to his garden, but even these simple pleasures became sources of frustration. Reading took longer than it used to, and he found himself losing track of sentences halfway through. Martha did her best to maintain a positive attitude, but William could see the worry in her eyes. Their daughter, Sarah, called every day from her home in California, offering to fly out and be with them. William insisted that wasn't necessary, but his difficulty communicating over the phone made these conversations short and stilted. The MRI appointment took place at the Regional Medical Center downtown. William lay still inside the loud, cramped machine, listening to the rhythmic banging sounds and trying not to think about what the images might reveal. Martha waited in the lobby, reading the same magazine page over and over again, unable to concentrate on anything. When they returned to Dr. Peterson's office for the results, the atmosphere felt different. The doctor's nurse, usually chatty and upbeat, spoke in hushed tones. Dr. Peterson called them into his office rather than an examination room, which William recognized as a bad sign. The doctor spread out the MRI images on his desk like pieces of a puzzle. He pointed to different areas of William's brain, explaining in careful, measured words what the scans revealed. William tried to follow along, but the medical terminology felt foreign and frightening. What he understood clearly was the serious tone in Dr. Peterson's voice and the way Martha's hand tightened around his. The doctor was referring them to a specialist at the University Medical Center, someone who dealt specifically with the type of condition the tests had revealed. As they drove home in silence, William watched the familiar streets of their neighborhood pass by. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had changed. The man who had spent his entire career helping others find their words was slowly losing his own. That evening, William sat in his study surrounded by the books he had collected over decades of teaching. Volumes of Shakespeare, Dickens, and Hemingway lined the shelves, along with hundreds of student essays and creative writing projects he had saved over the years. Each book represented countless hours of discussion, analysis, and the joy of sharing literature with young minds. He pulled out a leather-bound journal that Martha had given him for their anniversary and tried to write about what he was feeling. But even writing, which had always been easier for him than speaking, now required enormous effort. His thoughts felt jumbled, like puzzle pieces that no longer fit together properly. Martha found him there hours later, his head resting on the desk beside a page with only a few scattered words written on it. She gently woke him and helped him to bed, both of them knowing that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The appointment with the neurologist was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Dr. Sarah Chen came highly recommended and specialized in communication disorders. Her office walls were covered with certificates and awards, but also with colorful drawings that looked like they had been made by children, which somehow made the space feel more welcoming. Dr. Chen spent over an hour with William, conducting tests that were more detailed than anything he had experienced before. She asked him to name objects in pictures, repeat words and phrases, and complete various cognitive exercises. Some tasks felt impossible, while others seemed almost normal. Throughout the evaluation, Dr. Chen took careful notes and spoke to William with patience and respect. She never made him feel rushed or embarrassed when he struggled to find words. Instead, she encouraged him to take his time and praised him for his efforts. When the testing was complete, Dr. Chen sat down with William and Martha to discuss her findings. She explained that William was experiencing a condition that affects the brain's ability to process and produce language. The medical term felt heavy and unfamiliar, but her explanation was clear and compassionate. The condition was progressive, meaning it would gradually get worse over time. There was no cure, but there were treatments and therapies that could help slow the progression and improve quality of life. Dr. Chen recommended speech therapy, occupational therapy, and medications that might help with some symptoms. William felt the room spinning as he tried to process this information. The man who had dedicated his life to words and communication was losing the very abilities that defined him. How could he express his love to Martha? How could he share stories with his future grandchildren? How could he continue to be himself without the gift of language that had always been his greatest strength? Dr. Chen seemed to understand his distress without him having to voice it. She explained that while the journey ahead would be challenging, Many people with this condition continued to live meaningful, fulfilling lives. The key was adapting to changes and finding new ways to connect with others. As they prepared to leave the office, Dr. Chen handed Martha a folder filled with information about support groups, therapy options, and resources for families dealing with similar situations. She also gave William a small card with her direct phone number, telling him to call if he had any questions or concerns. The drive home was quiet, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with uncertainty anymore, but with the weight of knowledge. They finally had answers, even if those answers weren't what they had hoped to hear. That night, William and Martha sat together on their living room couch, holding hands and processing everything they had learned. William struggled to find the words to express his fears about the future, but Martha seemed to understand without him having to explain. She assured him that they would face this challenge together, just as they had faced everything else in their marriage. Over the next few days, William began to notice his condition more acutely. Words that had once come easily now required conscious effort to retrieve. Simple conversations with neighbors or phone calls to old friends became exercises in patience and frustration. But he also began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way Martha's eyes crinkled when she smiled, the sound of birds singing in their backyard in the early morning, the feeling of sunlight warming his face as he sat on the front porch. Perhaps losing his words was teaching him to appreciate a different kind of communication. Sarah finally convinced them to let her visit, flying in from California with her husband and their 2 young children. William had been nervous about seeing his grandchildren, worried that his condition would frighten them or that he wouldn't be able to communicate with them properly. But 5-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Jack didn't seem to mind that their grandfather spoke differently than before. They were content to sit with him while he read picture books, even when he had to point to words instead of saying them. They played simple games that didn't require much talking, and their laughter filled the house with a joy that William had feared he might never experience again. The visit reminded William that connection with others didn't always require perfect speech. Love could be communicated through gentle touches, shared glances, and simply being present with the people who mattered most. 3 months after his diagnosis, William began speech therapy with a young woman named Rebecca Martinez. She worked at the rehabilitation center attached to the hospital and had a reputation for being both skilled and compassionate. Her office was bright and cheerful, filled with colorful charts, communication boards, and various tools designed to help people relearn how to express themselves. Rebecca's approach was different from what William had expected. Instead of focusing on what he could no longer do, she emphasized discovering new ways to communicate effectively. She introduced him to alternative methods of expression, including picture cards, writing, gestures, and even simple drawing techniques. During their first session, Rebecca asked William to tell her about his teaching career using any method that felt comfortable. He struggled with words, but found that when he combined simple phrases with gestures and wrote key words on a whiteboard, he could convey complex ideas about his love for literature and his students. Rebecca was impressed by William's creativity and determination. She noted that his intelligence and understanding remained completely intact, which would be a significant advantage in developing coping strategies. She designed a personalized therapy program that would work with his strengths while addressing his specific challenges. The exercises started simple. Rebecca would show William pictures of common objects and ask him to name them. When words wouldn't come, she encouraged him to describe their function or use gestures to indicate their purpose. Gradually, they progressed to more complex activities involving storytelling and conversation. One particularly meaningful session involved William bringing in photo albums from his teaching career. As they looked through pictures of his former students and classroom activities, he found that memories triggered words more easily than abstract exercises. Rebecca made note of this and began incorporating more personal, meaningful content into their sessions. Meanwhile, Martha was dealing with her own emotional journey. She had joined a support group for spouses of people with communication disorders. Meeting other families facing similar challenges helped her realize that she wasn't alone in feeling overwhelmed and sometimes frightened about the future. The support group met weekly at the community center. Martha initially felt reluctant to share personal details with strangers, but the group leader, Mrs. Patterson, had a gift for making everyone feel welcome and understood. Mrs. Patterson had cared for her own husband through a similar condition and could offer practical advice along with emotional support. Through the support group, Martha learned about adaptive equipment that could help William communicate more easily. She discovered apps for tablets that could speak words when he typed them, special phones with picture buttons for frequently called numbers, and communication boards that he could point to when speaking became too difficult. One evening, Martha surprised William by setting up a tablet with a communication app. At first, he was resistant, feeling that using technology was somehow admitting defeat. But when he realized he could use it to tell Martha about his day with greater detail and less frustration, he began to see it as a useful tool rather than a crutch. The tablet became William's constant companion. He used it to participate more fully in conversations with visitors, to order food at restaurants, and to communicate with doctors during medical appointments. While it wasn't the same as natural speech, it allowed him to express complex thoughts that would have been impossible otherwise. As autumn arrived, William decided he wanted to return to the high school for a visit. He had stayed in touch with several of his former colleagues through email, and they had been asking him to come by when he felt ready. Martha worried that seeing the school might be too emotional, but William felt strongly about maintaining this connection. Mrs. Rodriguez, the principal, greeted them warmly and arranged for William to visit during lunch period when he could see many of his former colleagues. The teachers were genuinely happy to see him, but William could sense their discomfort as they struggled to communicate with him naturally. His former colleague and friend, Mr. Davis, who taught history next door to William's classroom for 15 years, made a particular effort to engage him in conversation. Instead of speaking more loudly or slowly, which many people did automatically, Mr. Davis spoke normally and gave William plenty of time to respond. They talked about the new curriculum changes and some of the students they had both taught. William used a combination of his tablet, gestures, and the few words he could manage to share his thoughts. While the conversation was slower than their old discussions, it felt genuine and meaningful. The visit to his former classroom was especially powerful. The new teacher, Ms. Kim, had kept many of the motivational posters and book displays that William had used. Seeing his old space filled with eager young students reminded him of why he had loved teaching so much. One student, recognizing him from pictures in the hallway, approached and asked if he was the famous Mr. Thompson they had heard about. Using his tablet, William was able to tell the student about his love for teaching and encourage him to work hard on his writing. The interaction lasted only a few minutes, but it filled William with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. That evening, William sat in his study and attempted to write in his journal again. The process was slow and required frequent breaks, but he managed to capture some of his feelings about the day. Writing about his visit to the school, he realized that while his role had changed, his connection to education and young people didn't have to end completely. This realization led to a conversation with Rebecca about finding meaningful activities that could provide William with a sense of purpose. She suggested that many people in his situation found fulfillment in volunteer work that didn't require extensive verbal communication, but still allowed them to help others. After researching various options, William discovered a literacy program at the local library that needed volunteers to help adults learning to read. While he couldn't teach in the traditional sense, he could work one-on-one with students using visual aids, gestures, and patience to help them with basic reading skills. His first day volunteering was nerve-wracking. William worried that his communication difficulties would make it impossible to help his assigned student, a 40-year-old woman named Rosa, who was learning to read English as her second language. Rosa had moved to the United States 5 years earlier and worked 2 jobs while studying English in the evenings. To William's surprise, Rosa was patient and understanding about his speech difficulties. She seemed to recognize a fellow person struggling with language barriers, and their shared challenge created an immediate bond. William used picture books, simple writing, and lots of encouragement to help Rosa practice reading basic sentences. Rosa's determination reminded William of many of his former students who had overcome significant obstacles to achieve their goals. Working with her rekindled his passion for helping others learn, even though the methods were different from what he had used in his traditional classroom. Word of William's volunteer work spread through the library, and soon he was working with several adult literacy students. The program coordinator, Ms. Johnson, was impressed by his dedication and creativity in finding nonverbal ways to explain reading concepts. One of his students, an elderly man named Frank, who had never learned to read as a child, made remarkable progress under William's guidance. Frank later told Ms. Johnson that Mr. Thompson's patience and understanding made him feel less embarrassed about his struggles with reading. These experiences helped William realize that his value as an educator hadn't disappeared with his ability to speak fluently. His knowledge, empathy, and dedication to helping others learn remained intact. He had simply needed to find new ways to share these gifts. As winter approached, William's condition continued to progress gradually. Some days were better than others, and he learned to accept the fluctuations without becoming discouraged. Martha noticed that he had developed a stronger sense of resilience and adaptability than either of them had expected. Their relationship also evolved in unexpected ways. With traditional conversation becoming more challenging, they found new ways to connect and communicate. They began taking longer walks together, sharing comfortable silences and pointing out interesting things they noticed along the way. Martha started reading aloud to William in the evenings, something they hadn't done since the early years of their marriage. They rediscovered books they had both loved and found new stories that captured their interest. William would use his tablet to share his thoughts about characters and plot developments, leading to discussions that were different from their old conversations but equally meaningful. During this period, William also reconnected with old hobbies he had abandoned during his busy teaching years. He had always enjoyed photography, but had rarely had time to pursue it seriously. Now, with more free time and a new appreciation for visual communication, he began taking pictures of their neighborhood, family gatherings, and his volunteer activities. Photography became another form of expression for William. Through his camera lens, he could capture emotions and stories that he struggled to put into words. Martha was amazed by the beauty and emotion in his photographs, which revealed an artistic side of her husband that had been hidden beneath years of lesson plans and grading papers. William's daughter Sarah continued to call regularly, and these conversations became easier as they all adapted to new communication patterns. Sarah would ask yes or no questions that William could answer easily, and she learned to pause frequently to give him time to type responses on his tablet. During one of these calls, Sarah suggested that William consider writing a memoir about his teaching experiences. She argued that even if the writing process was slower than before, his stories about education and working with students were valuable and worth preserving. The idea intrigued William, but he felt overwhelmed by the prospect of writing an entire book. Rebecca, his speech therapist, suggested starting with short stories or essays about individual students or memorable teaching moments. She explained that many people with communication disorders found writing therapeutic and that the process might actually help maintain his language skills. William began working on short pieces about his teaching career, typing slowly on his tablet and transferring the text to his computer. The first essay was about a student who had overcome significant learning disabilities to become the first person in her family to attend college. Writing her story took William 3 weeks, but the finished piece captured both her determination and his pride in her accomplishments. Encouraged by this success, William continued writing about other memorable students and teaching experiences. Martha became his editor, helping him organize his thoughts and suggesting areas where more detail would enhance the stories. Working together on these writing projects gave them a shared goal and renewed sense of partnership. A year and a half after his diagnosis, William faced his greatest challenge yet. Martha had noticed that his condition was progressing more rapidly than they had initially expected. Simple tasks that had become manageable with practice were once again becoming difficult. Even using his communication tablet required more effort and concentration than before. Dr. Bacha Chen confirmed their observations during William's regular checkup. The latest tests showed that the areas of his brain responsible for language processing were being affected more extensively. She adjusted his medications and recommended increasing the frequency of his speech therapy sessions, but she was honest about the limitations of treatment. This news was devastating for both William and Martha. They had worked so hard to adapt to his condition and had found ways to maintain a fulfilling life despite the challenges. The possibility that these adaptations might not be enough felt overwhelming and frightening. William experienced a period of deep depression following this appointment. For several weeks, he withdrew from his volunteer activities and spent most of his time sitting quietly in his study. He stopped working on his writing projects and showed little interest in the photography hobby that had brought him so much joy. Martha struggled with her own feelings of helplessness. She had always been a problem solver, someone who could find practical solutions to any challenge. But this was a problem that couldn't be fixed with determination and hard work. She found herself grieving for the future they had planned and the conversations they would never have. Rebecca, his speech therapist, recognized the signs of depression and gently suggested that William might benefit from counseling. She recommended Dr. Michael Torres, a psychologist who specialized in working with people facing progressive illnesses. Dr. Torres had experience helping patients and families cope with the emotional challenges of conditions that affected communication. William was initially resistant to the idea of therapy. He felt that talking about his problems would only make them seem more real and overwhelming. But Martha encouraged him to try at least one session, arguing that they needed all the help they could get to navigate this difficult journey. Dr. Torres was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and an office filled with books, plants, and comfortable furniture. He had a gift for making people feel heard and understood, even when communication was challenging. During their first session, he used a variety of techniques to help William express his feelings about his condition. Through writing, drawing, and simple gestures, William was able to communicate his fears about becoming a burden to Martha, his frustration with losing his independence, and his grief over the loss of his identity as a teacher and communicator. Dr. Torres validated these feelings while helping William recognize the strengths and adaptations he had already developed. One breakthrough came when Dr. Torres asked William to describe what he had gained from his experience with this condition. At first, William couldn't think of anything positive about his situation, but as they explored the question together, he began to recognize that he had developed greater patience, deeper appreciation for nonverbal communication, and stronger connections with people facing similar challenges. Dr. Torres also worked with Martha, helping her process her own grief and anxiety about the future. He taught them both strategies for managing difficult emotions and maintaining hope even when facing uncertain outcomes. These sessions became a vital part of their weekly routine and provided them with tools for coping with the ongoing challenges. Around this time, William received an unexpected phone call from his former principal, Mrs. Rodriguez. The high school was planning a special ceremony to honor retired teachers who had made significant contributions to the school community. William was going to be one of the honorees, and they wanted to know if he would be comfortable attending the event. William's first instinct was to decline. The thought of being in front of a large group of people when he could barely speak felt terrifying, but Martha and Sarah both encouraged him to consider it, arguing that his impact on students and colleagues deserved to be celebrated. After much deliberation, William decided to attend the ceremony with the understanding that he wouldn't be expected to give a speech. Mrs. Rodriguez assured him that they would simply read a brief description of his contributions and present him with a plaque recognizing his years of service. The night of the ceremony, William was nervous but determined to be there. The high school auditorium was filled with current and former teachers, students, and community members. When his name was called, William walked slowly to the podium with Martha beside him for support. Mrs. Rodriguez read a beautiful tribute highlighting William's dedication to his students, his innovative teaching methods, and the lasting impact he had made on the school community. Several former students who had returned for the ceremony stood and applauded, some with tears in their eyes. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman in the audience asked if she could say something about Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Rodriguez handed her the microphone, and she introduced herself as Jennifer, one of William's former students from 15 years earlier. Jennifer spoke about how Mr. Thompson had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. She had struggled with learning disabilities and had been ready to drop out of high school when she enrolled in his English class. His patience, creativity, and encouragement had helped her not only graduate, but go on to become a special education teacher herself. Her words were followed by similar testimonials from other former students who had traveled from different states to be there that evening. Each person shared a specific story about how William had influenced their life, encouraged their dreams, or helped them overcome obstacles. William listened to these tributes with tears streaming down his face. He had never fully understood the depth of impact he had made on his students' lives. Hearing their stories reminded him that his true legacy wasn't in his ability to speak eloquently, but in the countless lives he had touched through his dedication and caring. When the formal ceremony ended, William was surrounded by former students and colleagues who wanted to express their gratitude and share memories. Many of them had heard about his condition and went out of their way to communicate with him in ways that didn't require extensive verbal responses. One former student, now a successful lawyer, told William that she kept a note he had written on one of her essays in her office as a reminder to always encourage others the way he had encouraged her. Another student, who had become a published author, credited William with introducing him to the poetry that had shaped his writing career. The evening was emotionally overwhelming, but also deeply healing. William realized that while his condition had taken away his ability to speak, it couldn't erase the positive impact he had made during his teaching career. His words had lived on in the lives of his students, creating ripples of influence that extended far beyond his classroom. In the months following the ceremony, William experienced a renewed sense of purpose. He returned to his volunteer work at the library with greater enthusiasm and continued working on his writing projects. He also began corresponding with some of his former students who had reached out after the ceremony. These correspondences were conducted primarily through email and letters, allowing William to communicate more easily than he could in person. Several students shared updates about their careers and families and asked for his advice on various life challenges. Being able to mentor and encourage others, even in this limited way, gave William a sense of continuing usefulness. Martha noticed positive changes in her husband's mood and attitude. While he still had difficult days when his condition frustrated him, he seemed to have found a deeper acceptance of his situation. He spent more time focusing on what he could do, rather than dwelling on what he had lost. His photography hobby also evolved during this period. William began creating photo essays that told stories without words. He documented the life of their neighborhood, capturing moments of joy, community, and human connection that spoke volumes without requiring captions or explanations. One photo essay focused on the adult literacy program at the library. William's pictures showed his students' concentration, determination, and joy as they worked on reading skills. The images captured the universal human desire to learn and grow, regardless of age or circumstances. The library director was so impressed with William's photo essay that she asked permission to display the pictures in the library's main gallery. The exhibition, titled "Learning Has No Limits," drew visitors from throughout the community and sparked conversations about adult education and literacy programs. William's success with photography led to other opportunities. A local magazine asked him to contribute photo essays about community events and programs. While he couldn't write traditional articles, his pictures told compelling stories that resonated with readers. These new creative outlets gave William a sense of purpose and accomplishment that he had feared he might never experience again. He discovered that there were many ways to communicate and inspire others beyond traditional speech and writing. As his second anniversary with the condition approached, William reflected on how much his life had changed. While he mourned the loss of his verbal abilities, he had gained new perspectives on communication, resilience, and the many ways people can connect with one another. His relationship with Martha had deepened in unexpected ways. They had learned to communicate through glances, touches, and shared experiences that required no words at all. Their evening walks had become sacred time when they could be together without the pressure of conversation. Sarah visited more frequently, often bringing her children who had completely adapted to their grandfather's condition. 5-year-old Emma had learned to use simple sign language to communicate with William, and they spent hours working on picture books and puzzles together. William's story spread throughout the community as people learned about his volunteer work, photography projects, and positive attitude in the face of adversity. He received invitations to visit other schools and community groups, not to speak, but simply to be an example of how people can adapt and continue contributing to society despite significant challenges. One particularly meaningful invitation came from a support group for newly diagnosed patients with communication disorders. The group leader asked if William would be willing to meet with people who were just beginning their journey with similar conditions. William agreed to attend a support group meeting, where he met several people who were struggling with the fear and uncertainty that he remembered from his early diagnosis. Without being able to speak extensively, he communicated hope and practical strategies through demonstrations of his communication tools, examples of his photography work, and simply by being present as proof that life could continue to be meaningful. A man named Robert, recently diagnosed at age 58, was particularly inspired by William's example. Robert had been a radio announcer for 30 years and felt that his identity was completely tied to his voice. Meeting William helped him begin to imagine alternative ways to use his broadcasting skills and knowledge. William became a regular attendee at support group meetings, serving as an informal mentor to newly diagnosed individuals and their families. His presence provided hope and practical examples of adaptation that helped others navigate their own journeys with greater confidence. As his story concludes, William continues to face challenges as his condition gradually progresses. Some abilities that he fought hard to maintain eventually become too difficult to sustain. But he has learned to grieve these losses while remaining open to discovering new capabilities and different ways of engaging with the world. His legacy extends far beyond his years in the classroom. Through his volunteer work, photography, writing projects, and mentoring of others facing similar challenges, William has demonstrated that a person's value and contribution to society aren't defined by their ability to speak perfectly. Martha often reflects on how their marriage has been strengthened by navigating this challenge together. They have learned that love can be expressed in countless ways beyond words, and that true partnership means adapting and growing together through whatever life brings. William's former students continue to stay in touch, sharing their successes and challenges with the teacher who helped shape their lives. His influence continues to ripple outward through their work, families, and communities, proving that a dedicated educator's impact extends far beyond any single moment or conversation. Today, William sits in his garden, photographing the changing seasons and reflecting on a life that has been marked by both loss and unexpected discoveries. While he could never have chosen this journey, he has found meaning, purpose, and even joy in adapting to circumstances he never could have imagined. His story serves as a powerful reminder that human resilience and the capacity for adaptation are remarkable. Even when facing significant losses, people can discover new strengths, forge deeper connections, and continue contributing to the lives of others in ways they never expected. William's journey continues, marked by daily challenges, but also by moments of profound connection, creativity, and purpose. He has learned that while words are powerful, they are not the only way to touch lives, share wisdom, and leave a lasting legacy of hope and inspiration.